Welcome to Unpacking the Problem. My name is Jeff Cook. In this episode, we're going to talk about modern genetics medicine and eugenics. And is there any difference? There's a lot of people who have been getting their genes traced and tracked, and it's very fascinating and very exciting. You can see your relatives, who you're related to. Hey, you can check your spouse to see if you're related to her before you get married. All sorts of interesting things with genetics. But we want to tackle some areas today about genetics that is very little known, and it's very hard to find the research papers out there today. I don't have any for reference after the internet was deleted. We'll go into that. But I'm going to kind of bring up a few points, and we're going to talk freely. This is Unpacking the Problem. Let's do it. Hi, John. Hi, Greg. How are you today?
You do? Great.
Good. You guys both have kids. Have you ever been in a situation where the kid's acting up and you turn to the mother and say, "This is your kid. Go take care of it." Ever hear that? Or better yet, she gets that from me, when something good, right?
Okay. Well, I'm separated, so when I have my kids, I, of course,
it's always her fault then. No. Yeah. But you understand what I'm saying. Saying. I've even had guys I know who just over the years, I met lots of people, and some are pretty darn racist, and some of them even kind of have said things like, I said, "Well, you got a great wife," and he's like, "Yeah, she got good genes." It's all he's interested in is the genes, and and believe it or not, it goes along with a lot of racist ideas. And so, Greg, you know a little bit about language. What does the root "eu" mean? EU.
EU.
Yeah.
Boy, you're catching me off guard. Like
euphemism. The EU. No, the EU and euphemism. What is a euphemism? We know that, right?
Well, a euphemism means. You're catching me off guard, so I've got to.
I know.
Piece this together. So,
John,
euphemism obviously is something that is a sort of a soft way of talking about something much harsher. So,
putting a positive slant.
Obviously, Greek Euclid.
It means good. You means good. So eustress would be the good type of stress that energizes you to do something great. So
like
eugenics
would be
means
like phenomenon. So eufem would be a good phenomenon, I guess, a good happening.
Yeah, interesting. Yes. So it would be a euphemism is basically putting a good slant on something that is bad. It's trying to make something bad sound
bad. That makes sense.
It is, yeah. And eugenics means good genes. So I'd like to raise this argument, and we can debate, and that is that I think that all genetics, all gene, all missenses, all mutations are good, positive things, even the ones that have negative consequences. What's that?
I'm with you 100% on that.
Well, I don't think there is many people that are 100% because there's no one, not one in the medical profession that will ever agree with this, except a few articles that I've read over the years before they deleted the internet, if you know what I mean. You've heard about this concept of deleting the internet, right? Really quick.
I have heard about that, but I'm still not sure where you're going. I have something to say about where I thought you were going, so I'll wait.
All right. Well, all right. So the internet, you can only go about down 20, 30 pages before it keeps repeating anymore. So this happened. So there's new engines or all the engines out there. There's a couple out there that can go deep, and you can find old papers and all this stuff from the 80s and 70s. It used to be that it just went everywhere. And now with Google, DuckDuckGo, and a lot of these other search engines, you can't find anything beyond the preferred, narrative. So I can't find these papers that I read years ago, but some people were very critical about modern genetics medicine, and saying that it is nothing different than eugenics. It is identical to the Nazi eugenics and the British and American eugenics. There's no difference. And so I want to kind of talk into it. Now, you were going to say something where you thought I was
Well,
going. Go
okay.
ahead.
Here's my perspective. Of course,
Yeah.
as you know, I'm a Bible believing Christian.
Right.
And so, as a Bible believing Christian, I believe that we all descend from Adam and Eve. And furthermore, there was a flood and that we all descend from Noah and his sons. So, from that, the Bible talks about the table of nations, and that there was definitely a split, and all the peoples of the world, including black and brown and white and everybody, all the different people were from that same stock. That's what I believe. Now, has there? I also believe that prior to the flood, there was genetic manipulation going on, and also after that, the Bible talks about this race of giants that came from angels or whoever these sons of gods were. Some say fallen angels, some say something else. But anyway, that apparently were not human. And although their genetics may have been very good, mixing them was not a good thing. And it led to lots of problems. So when you say, are all genes good? I would say all genes as they were originally intended are certainly good. And I think, that's my belief. I think that God made everybody, but if you start mixing human with something other than human, whatever that might be, then you could end up with something that is not good. And anyway, but you're talking about eugenics. That's from the perspective of people that think some races are better than others, and they're going to try to get rid of the ones that are bad. That's the original.
Some genes, yeah, some genes are better.
That's what they meant.
Yes.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. I don't subscribe to that at all.
All right,
that's me.
Just on introductory level, John, where are you at with this, with genetics and eugenics, and are you familiar with any of it?
I'm a little vaguely familiar with it, but with the Nazis that I understand, and then the eugenics and all that. There's definitely an element of racism involved in that aspect of that, depending on the Nazis' perception of it, even in eugenics. Good, bad, I don't know. I had genetic tests, see what my probability is for Alzheimer's because my dad had it.
That would be a quote unquote bad gene.
Yeah, exactly. And I have two
factors
that make up that are identical, which makes me 30%. If they would have been opposite, it would have been 60%. Now, I want to know that. If I can see how people don't want to know that, what can I do to mitigate that? Well, I try to eat healthy and everything else, maybe Sudoku, whatever. Right. It's all probably a moot point. But I think science is evolving with it. There's a lot of stem cell therapies and all kinds of other stuff going on. So it's I'm sure you have a lot more information on that.
I know quite a lot about stem cells. The first day I met Greg was probably the last day I ever spoke with this about it with him. But back around 2008, 2007, 2008, I was doing some very strange experiments.
Go ahead.
Some very odd experiments. And so it brought up a meme. I was looking at a meme today on Tesla, and I won't use the full euphemism. I'll just say mofos is what was in the thing. You can make it, but it had a picture of Tesla, and it said, "Smart mofos look like crazy mofos to dumb mofos," but they didn't use mofos. And it's exactly so. But even I was looking at some of the stuff that I was working on and go, "This is very crazy," and I stopped it. And I never got back into it. But I was basically looking for some really interesting properties and with lotions and just kind of crude medicines. From the garden and a long time ago, and came across some very odd things, and led to a huge interest in stem cells and genetics and how life is formed, and which got me and Greg into the conversation because I said, he told me he was a young Earth. He subscribes to the Young Earth, and I said, well, you're probably not going to like my experiments. And he said, actually, I do, because it shows a very fast evolutionary process. So I don't know if you remember that conversation, but it was
I don't, but I believe
I'll never forget it. All right, so you remember the day we met, though, at Tesla Tech.
And I do remember that.
Tesla Tech, yeah. So how many years ago?
I remember having conversations, but I don't remember the details. So,
and it was a long time ago. So that was what, 13 years ago?
I guess so. And by the way, I just got back from this year's Tesla Tech conference.
All right, give me a quick update on that, and we'll get into the genes. Or no, we can't talk about that. It's more like some of the inner workings of what's going on. But how was it in general?
In general, it was great. We had some really great The speaker list was I think, keeps going up. The attendance was higher. One thing we did new this year was we had a live stream. We had about 100 people,
Wow.
streaming into a live stream, which was not a ton,
No.
but it was better than nothing. And we'd never done it before. So we've got nowhere to go but up from now on. We're looking at combining next year this conference with a couple other groups, which I've been a part of.
Tesla
So I'll
Tech?
just leave it at that.
Nice.
Okay, so I know exactly what you're talking about. All right, but I'm not gonna get into it. All right, so you were the MC again this year?
Yeah, I've emceed several
Right.
different conferences, not just this one, as you know,
Good.
Jeff.
Yeah.
So
All
anyway,
right, so I kind of
you like
gave
me.
you guys a heads up that we were going to do this on genes and said everyone brush up on their genetic background. Did you have a chance to look into anything? Are you pretty familiar with
Well,
genetics?
I'm familiar with a lot of the topics, and I just want to get back. John was talking about, our genes are messed up, because if you get, if both of your parents have a deficiency, then you're far more likely to have that same deficiency, and that's all true. And again, I just have to bring back to the biblical thing, which is, who did Adam's children marry, or who did Noah's children marry? Well, they married their sisters. I mean, that's just how it was, because there literally wasn't anybody else. And today we say, well, you can't do that because, that's awful and you're going to have all these genetic problems. Well, the original stock was not that messed up. The messing up did occur over time in various ways. It had nothing to do with any one race being better than some other race. That's genetics in a different sense, which I totally reject. But it does have to do with the fall of man, which I don't reject. I believe, and we've shown that your genes can actually be altered in some way. Now, can it be altered by your behavior or some of these other weird things? I'm not sure. I'm not saying that I have an answer to that, but I am definitely open to the idea that genes can be altered. We're showing that, with the technology that you want to talk about today. So in general, I think genes have been altered in a negative way. That's the fall of man. So we're more likely, you can't marry your cousin or even your second cousin's not so good, just because you're more likely to get, if there's something bad on one side, you're likely to pair up with something bad on the other side. And that's the reason why, because genes are not as good as they were, 4,000 years ago.
All right. So the best way I use to describe what I'm going to say is there's a gene. So there's different types of mutations. There's a missense mutation. There's where it can be deleted. I don't remember all the different types, but one I want to talk about is the missense mutation. Now, one of the most well-studied and well-understood genetics mutation of all is that with sickle cell anemia. And Jeffrey, we're going to pull up that Wikipedia a little bit on sickle cell anemia, and but not yet. And I want to kind of go over it. All right. So here's what happened. So you got DNA and RNA. All right, and just so we start very basics, and each of these have 4 different letters of the alphabet, I guess you could say. And I don't remember them offhand. There's uracil for RNA. There's thymine. I got them written down. There's 4. Yeah. And so now RNA is slightly different. It uses uracil instead of thymine. I think that's what it is. And then each of these, it's going to create a word with 3 letters. So it's kind of, you think of like computer binary language. The computer recognizes on and off. So you have a 0 or 1. DNA has
HDTP.
Computers is binary. So
no, but I mean the language of DNA
is 4 letters, but they only use 3 of them.
I see.
So it's possible they could switch out once. So their words are only 3 letters long, but they have a possible 3 letters. So if you do the math, I think it's like 64 different possibilities that you can do. Now, so that's just to create some bit of information. And obviously in the sequence of them, it's a very fascinating language, and it's way more advanced than anything we've ever done on computers. I think once we start computing like DNA does, we can really find some interesting things. Like the first little process, I think we will find a better way for file compression. For example, there's a better term, I guess, but I'm just going to say it. The sperm of a fruit fly is 1,000 times larger than the sperm of a human being. 1,000 times bigger, which suggests to
From
me
horny
or
fruit
implies
flies, I guess.
fruit flies.
All right.
Now, not fruity flies, but fruit flies.
Okay.
And they are a very simple animal. They can mutate into significantly in a few days, in one
Right.
generation. So very, very simple DNA. So why is it so big? Because it's not as compressed. So there's definitely ways to compress. So it suggests that DNA, the way it's coding it, is the more information you have, the more it can be compressed. It's not infinite compression, but it is lossless. But the more you have, and I've been studying this since the early years, it was 2007, I guess is what it was. I'm trying to figure a way to code and compress in this way, but I'm always trying to convert from binary to this other way, which
I'd like to just throw in that my master's work was in something called information theory, which is you're going right down that very track. It's all about obviously maximizing, information across a channel or in some computational process. It's all the same kind of stuff. Information is closely related to the concept of entropy, but I'll let you finish.
Well, we should write a paper on this.
I have, but go ahead.
All right. Well, I have to. I'm waiting for a big discovery in this, but like I said, it's kind of a long time I've been working on it, and it's very complicated. And I have this moment where I got it, and then I go to write down. I'm like, I forgot it. It's very confusing. So. Because you're trying to think in a new way. It's not binary code. It's not from our language.
It's base 4 code, but it's in packets of 3
it's
nodes at a time.
Yeah, and out of 4 options. So it's very, and so then you look. All right, so really quick, I'm just going to give a little background on the way this is done. So RNA, most of the so when they create the ribosome creates the RNA. That's where this is who's building us right now. Okay, it's the ribosomes. And they're making the RNA. RNA uses uracil. Now, this is usually temporary, and they carry this information in RNA to different parts and say, hey, this is what we're going to copy, and here you're going to make DNA out of it. So it's very temporary, and so uracil is very energy efficient to make. As far as the thiamine, I think it's thiamine. I better look it up later. And it costs a little bit more, but it lasts a lot longer. It's a stabler molecule. So if you want something permanent, DNA, you're going to use those 4 letters for the code. It's kind of like what is the old days with tape. You'd record it on the tape and you'd master in digital or preserve it on a record. All right. So anyway, that's kind of the way. Remember the old days of analog recording? You record it on tape.
I'm older than you.
I know. But it's like if you think about, forget about it. But it was before digital. That tape is very fragile. You take a magnet to it and it's gone, but you put it into a record and, obviously
well, it's like a lot of some of the old movies like Laurel and Hardy, back from the 20s were lost, and they had to go through an extensive process to preserve that stuff because of the mediums that they used back in those days.
So this is the beauty. The beauty in this is that we can find an analogy like that with tapes and records, and DNA has been doing it for who knows how long.
The difference would be between an analog and a digital. Yeah. So are you saying is there something
about no? So the preserving of the information is very soft and unstable, like a tape, an RNA with uracil, and then or uracil. I don't know if it's uracil. And then when it's preserved into DNA and it's put into the molecules and things like that in the cells, then it's a lot more stable. It uses a different, protein.
Let me just throw in this thought, if this is relevant at all, I don't know, but in information, if you have information that you don't want lost and it's digital, the way you preserve it, you can't preserve it like 100%, but you can preserve it 99.999 to whatever degree you want by introducing redundancy on purpose. And, we've seen in the human body that there's a certain amount of redundancy in the DNA.
Yes.
And
now you're getting, it's definitely relevant.
That's on purpose because that's what keeps it able to replicate itself. So
yes.
Anyway,
the point where I'm going to kind of lean to is that I would believe, and I've kind of done the math on it statistically, you have a better chance of getting a damaging missense mutation that is going to cause life-threatening situations astronomically smaller than getting struck by another galaxy, struck by lightning from another galaxy. It's almost impossible. No. So it's almost impossible, and I'll show you why. But first, I want to kind of give the example evidence that this people have said this, that they're going this way, and it's quickly shut down. Go ahead and show that sickle cell anemia. Now, this disease is very interesting because Margaret Sanger and all those people who were trying to get rid of the black race in the early days would use this as an example of why blacks were inferior, is because they get diseases that we don't get. Well, interestingly, it turns out that this is a disease from geographic locations of mosquitoes and certain bacteria. What's that? Greg's cam is what?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I didn't do anything.
Oh, there he is. There he is.
That's fine. You're back out.
All right, cool.
We got it.
All right. So if you kind of, let's see, can you do that full screen so John and I, so I can read this a little bit better? Let me see what we got here. Scroll down a little bit. This just goes through the symptoms, which are interesting. Scroll down a little bit more.
Let me just throw in.
Wait, too much. Oh, yeah. No, hold on, Greg. I want to show something really quick, and then we'll talk. Well, okay. Go ahead. Do it.
I'll just kind of talk about it. This
Yeah.
is an example of. It's well known that sickle cell anemia and all the diseases related to that are far more likely to be found among black people than others. That's just a fact.
Wait,
and that's not like saying black genes aren't as good.
It's not a fact. That's what I'm going to get into. The real fact is this. The real fact is that it happens in regions where these mosquito and the bacteria exist.
I see.
And the fact that it does occur more in blacks is because they live there.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing.
But it
hold on. Are we talking genetically specific?
Yes.
Then these things. Okay. So the origin of Africa, right?
Yeah.
And even though they haven't ever been there, they're more prone to that because of genetic mutations that occurred to their ancestors.
Like monarch butterflies.
Not at all. That's not at all, because sickle cell anemia is only 100 years old.
It never existed at all.
And the numbers are dropping.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes. So this happens all the time in history. I think we're going through it with autism, but I'm not going to get into it now. And all right. So what happened? What they're finding? The first thing they found out was sickle cell anemia. Well, when they found the red blood cells are curled up in a certain way, and they get other problems. Okay. So the result is that they are immune to malaria.
So good comes of it.
My belief is that good was the intent. Mm-hmm. It had to get rid of a more urgent problem, which is malaria, than a longer term problem that we could fix later. The DNA will figure out how to fix the sickle cell later, but we know how to stop the malaria, which is the urgent problem. And then
you're saying
then the next generation are immune to the sickle cell anemia, but maintain the immunity to malaria. So they become later immune. The second generation of kids are immune to both sickle cell and they're carriers, but they're immune to malaria, and they carry that forward. That is the facts of sickle cell. And you can read it right here, although the people are trying to fight it. But one of the first things they notice is that, hey, these people don't get malaria. And then their kids don't get malaria and then don't get sickle cell. So it's the body's last-ditch effort to stop malaria by creating a mutation that has some consequences, but we'll deal with that later. The second generation will learn how to adapt to that.
This is the very concept that a vaccine is supposed to do. And so it's supposed to do this, not necessarily that it does do this, but basically you introduce some of the disease so that you become immune to that disease. And people have been doing that for.
But it's a genetic mutation that the body does.
Right.
John, you had a question and a comment, please. I want to hear it.
So what you're saying is, but if it's only 100 years old, right, and it was a genetic mutation that caused to evolve with this, and it's only related to specific geographical locations,
right, where the bacteria is found.
There's a lot of people that aren't from the malaria areas generationally and still have sickle cell.
Right, because it's passed the gene is passed on to the kids. So as people traveled, from Well, it may be more than 100 years, but it was first described 100 years ago,
Yeah, it
which
has to be,
suggests they didn't see it in biblical times. But it may
'cause,
have been a little
yeah,
bit happening in jungles somewhere along the lines that just didn't meet the modern medicine of the West. But it's definitely not an ancient disease. So it started happening. They started seeing it 100 years ago ish, and 1910 or something like that. Or it could be a little further, but something like that. So what they saw is so they got malaria from the bacteria, started killing a bunch of villagers and that, and those villagers would travel and they pass it on. If they survived the sickle cell, they'd have kids and they pass it on. The kids then don't have the disease of sickle cell, and so they breed and so on and so forth, and they don't have the disease, but they pass it on. So carriers can pass it on. Some will get the disease from the carrier, but the carriers don't get the disease at all. They don't get the disease at all, and they don't get the malaria.
And if you look at the sickle cell numbers versus death rate of malaria in those geographical areas, malaria is categorically larger.
Yes, and it's a lot faster. You can die within weeks.
So
the body's less digested.
So the natural evolution, I don't know the causation or whatever, is only a select few, comparatively speaking.
Right.
It's not a mass thing.
No, it would have to happen. The only way that would spread would be because only that one person's body who had really creative ribosomes or really creative mitochondria came up with this idea or did it and it worked and manipulated the gene because all right, so we talk about the RNA and the DNA. So it's the mitochondria going, okay, we're going to construct this RNA and we're going to then ship that information out. Now there are the modern genetics and modern medicine says genes don't change. All right. And that now people are arguing that and they're saying, okay, well, they can make substitutions and that. I would say genes change throughout your life. And I'll give you some evidence to that too. And then we'll come back to this. So when my son Jeffrey here was born, he had bright blue eyes, really interesting colored eyes. And I said, is he going to keep those all his life? And the doctor said, oh yeah, once you're born with blue eyes, you have blue eyes. And I kind of went, oh, well, I was born with blue eyes and my eyes are green now.
Interesting.
So Jeffrey's turned green, mine turned green.
I was born with red hair. Of course, now I don't have any, but it was brown most of my life.
So genes do change. There's a lot of evidence of it. Yeah. So, and they change through our life. They can change very easily with diet. So really quick, just by pure logic. So a lot of the proteins we use for constructing genes, we get from diet. Well, what happens if we don't have that diet? What happens if all of a sudden that protein is absent in winter? We don't have that antelope that carries that gene, and we have to live, off of fish or something, whatever it is. So a lot of the proteins are absent, and so the body can make substitutions. And it's my belief. You remember we had that talk with Jim Abrahams with the ketogenic diet. It's my belief that the ketogenic diet induces some DNA change, some genetic change, and reconstructs the brain to behave in a different way because it's just depriving the body from certain proteins it's used to building with. So my thing is this: the genes definitely change. How much they change in one's life, we don't know. But some of the papers that I've read, it's about 10 years. About 10 years, you can completely change over your DNA with diet alone. Not everything.
Like
you're not going to also.
Well, you're still going to be you, but
you're not going to all of a sudden grow taller and things like that. But there's probably some way to do it. But I don't know how complicated.
I've heard
but certain things
in relation to
like
growing
it boosts
taller,
your metabolism
that there's a growth inhibitor gene, and if you could alter that, then you could grow more. Like, for example, what is it? A liger, which is a tiger and a lion together, doesn't have the growth inhibitor gene, and so they can grow to these massive sizes.
Yeah.
So I'm open.
And with Alzheimer's too, what if we could reverse? Let's suppose you had this quote unquote bad gene, which I don't believe exists, and all of a sudden you kind of do something in your diet or good health, and all of a sudden it changes the outcome just because your body doesn't need to program in that way. Because my belief is that Alzheimer's and MS and a number of other things are environmentally induced. Something out in the brain and the brain scars off that area because it's dangerous. It's a response to an external stimuli. That's
Well,
just my
I
belief.
mean, like in Ohio, like with my dad, he worked in a factory and they had a lot of lead there. And I've never seen so many people with Alzheimer's, at least on my street in Ohio, compared to Arizona. So just that anecdotally, I believe, but they definitely map the chromosomes to those things. Now,
but what does that mean? It's complicated.
exactly.
They don't know what
Like,
it means.
let's
Exactly,
specifically talk about like Down syndrome, where
yes.
they can absolutely before birth, if you have these genetic traits, predict within 100% probability of a
I know a
Down
family that
syndrome.
was tested positive and they gave birth to baby anyway and didn't have Down at all. So it's not 100%.
Wow.
I know that family personally.
Wow.
Yeah, but there's the
Okay,
numbers.
it's not
of
100%.
Down
It's
syndrome-
not 100%.
Okay, hold on. But the numbers
50-50.
of the number of Down syndrome kids are there, and it's a genetic mutation. I mean, my daughter has a genetic
It is,
mutation.
yeah.
Well,
I think that's the thing. We all do.
They
do.
can literally map it to
We're
the
all
DNA.
All right, so I'm going to show some neat things because you're right. All right, so the irony with that Down syndrome, I study this one a lot too because it's very well understood and well known. Well, it's not very well understood. It's very well known and it's common, and we can do a test. There was this family. They were friends, best friends at my last church up in Ohio, and both had kids at the same time, and they got excited. Both were tested positive for Down syndrome.
Interesting.
And both of them decided to have their babies. One didn't have Down syndrome, one did. It's 50-50. So
before we move on, can I?
Let me leave my last point.
Go ahead.
I also believe the Down syndrome is the body's last-ditch effort to stop some environmental destructive thing.
But you don't know what that thing is.
We don't know what that one is. I believe that once people start studying, they will find something is causing the body to respond and say, we got to mess up this chromosome right here because there's a lot of damage going to be there. It's a more immediate risk than Down syndrome. Yeah, okay, they'll die maybe in their mid-30s rather than 100, but they're not going to die tomorrow. Right. And I believe the body does this regularly. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Well, I got three things, couple of pushbacks, as you expect. But first of all, I'm just thinking, is someone with Down syndrome necessarily have worse genes? I mean, my brother was in a motorcycle accident. Your son has his issues. I believe that they were put on this earth to make us better people. And so
I definitely believe that in the case of my son.
I don't automatically say they have bad genes. I just don't.
No, I'm not saying they're wonderful. They're wonderful kids and wonderful human beings for sure. They're one of the most benevolent, friendly bunch of people that people could learn a lot from. I was just pointing out the fact, quote unquote, DNA.
We know. Yeah.
I'm not trying to push. That's a soft pushback. I was making, but my harder pushback.
The numbers of people with Down syndrome with the genetic, whatever they want to call it, the numbers there are higher than I think any other genetic issue.
It's pretty common. Yeah, it's pretty common.
So you think the focus would be study that group, and then autism, but they make the definition of spectrum so small that everybody can fit in that category.
Yeah, it's too vague. They're never going to find a gene for that because the definition is so vague. Well, they might find a gene, but go on, Greg. You were in mid thought.
I got a couple things I wanted to bring up. One, just a quick one I want to get out of the way. You were talking about sickle cell anemia being a result of where they were, but I still say they're black people living in America don't have it, and they and their ancestors have been here for way more than 100 years. So that doesn't answer the question for me. How come that would exactly answer.
Well, the sickle cell. Those living here came here before sickle cell, or their genes just never encountered sickle cell.
So why are they more likely to get it? Because their genetics.
They're not likely to get it if they don't have it.
Now, answer me this. This would be
sickle cell anemia is something they're born with, or something that they can get it through somewhere at a point in their life.
Understood. In a Google search, what's the statistical probability if an African American, a black person, their grandpa had sickle cell, right? So they went through the process, right? and there's still a statistical probability, higher probability of you getting that, even though they went through
Right.
the process of having it genetically, and then we're talking another generation. I'd like to see the correlation.
I think this is the way I look at it. So I envision the body is always kind of mitochondria that are getting signals of the outside world, what's outside the body, and they get an understanding of what's going on in the body. There's some problem. Okay, when there's a viral attack or a bacteria infection like malaria, then the body really tries to study it. In fact, what is it? Chicken pox, which comes back later as what is that? Shingles. The chicken pox virus is not eradicated on purpose. The chicken pox virus the immune system makes a deal with the chicken pox virus that it stays right behind its center of command. It's right behind the pituitary gland where the immune system's home is. And it stays there and watches it. It says, we will stop fighting if you stay in this area. It's when the immune system starts going that it leaves its restricted territory.
That reminds me of something.
Chicken pox is a truce. The body never fixed it because it studies it. I believe it did this with malaria and tried to find genetic manipulations with it to solve it later. So the body has been studying malaria for a long time, as long as that bacteria has been encountering humans, and it finally had a solution. And that solution is sickle cell anemia.
And riddle me this: the chickenpox vaccine for children, that eradicates it, right? Because you're not going to get shingles later. I mean, there are.
I don't know the efficacy of that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So they say it does. I don't know the efficacy of it. Greg, you were going to say
something. I just wanted to throw in before the chickenpox vaccination. My grandmother kept a journal of when her kids were little. And in this journal, she said, Artie, that's my mom, Artie and Mary both got chicken pox, and they were like happy about it. This is in the 30s. And they were happy
sooner rather than later. Yeah.
That they got that in. And so now they know they're good for the rest of their life,
Right,
anyway.
Right.
But the big pushback, if I can change it to this, you said earlier that genetic mutations happen throughout our lives. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that's true. But I'm not sure if it's a lack of protein that's doing it.
I don't think it is. I'm just saying if you deprive it, then it will have to make it.
Okay, let me just put in perspective the way I'm looking at it. I'm looking at genetic information is basically digital information. There's the DTP or whatever it is. Anyway, those 4 numbers, and it's like, well, they're either on or off. How do I need I know that the DNA molecule is a protein, so I need to get a certain kind of protein in order to get more D's and
this is where I think these dangerous chemicals
out in my mind.
Hold on, John. Hold on. I want to hear what Greg's question is.
That's my question. I don't see how that would change things. Digital information would I be more likely to get D's?
You're not those 4. You're not going to have a depletion. In fact, I believe that the body. I believe that the body metabolizes creates these with internal food.
Okay.
The molecules, there's a lot more molecules in a gene than just those. For instance, there's lysine, there's cysteine, actually that's one. There's all sorts of other proteins and amino acids that are attached to a gene or a molecule that the body needs to use to build. For instance, and we're going to get into the potassium channels. So there's a calcium activated potassium channel. I'm going to use an example. I'm going to show you. I did a presentation of this a couple of years ago. And so it involves a number of proteins. And some of these are only obtained through diet. If you don't eat them, and these are rebuilt every night you go to bed, your body is rebuilding these cells, any damage that was done to them in the brain or any tissue. Every day it needs these proteins. And if you don't give them for some months or years, then it will learn a way to keep building these molecules in other ways. Those are called missense mutations.
Okay. So do those Missense mutation. Is that what you call them?
Missense. They call
Okay.
them missense. It's a bad
Okay.
name.
Listen, okay,
They're
gotcha.
considering a
Do
bad
those
thing.
do those result in like changes in the code? I'm imagining DNA being
Sometimes
a string of code. Certain sequences get changed because they didn't have that protein? Is that what happened?
let me pull up. Let me do this. John, let me pull up an example. We're going to pull up one that I'm quite familiar with. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let's see what.
And you're talking more natural issues evolving one's DNA to fight whatever.
I want
But
to
there's so
ask you
many.
another question
Well,
about
hold
There's
that.
on,
so many.
Greg. I want to hear John. I can only
Go
hear
ahead.
one person at the same time. Yeah, go ahead, John.
You're more like the natural occurrences, malaria, stuff like this. But there's another thing, like with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and stuff like that, that was clearly linked to Roundup and chemicals. So there's so
Yes,
many
it
different
has to adapt to
chemicals
certain. Yes,
that
exactly.
that are affecting this, I think, at a pace that we've never seen before. Natural, you had like, okay, malaria, the black plague, all this other stuff. Now there's so many chemical variations that are introduced at the cell level that are causing cancers and all these mutations that it's scary.
Mm-hmm.
Like every other day there's a lawsuit of something like Roundup herbicide. It's linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You had all the stuff, the wartime where you're just burning tires and rubber. That, look what happened in 9/11, all those people with all those different cancers and mutations and all this other stuff directly linked to the chemicals used in products, especially if they're burnt.
Yes. So the body has to adapt all the time to environmental factors, and sometimes it makes it all. My thought is this: it always makes the right decision with what the circumstances has been given. Okay. So here's, for example, here's a missense mutation. It's substituting proline for leucine. It's the KCNT1 gene.
Can you put this up on the screen?
I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna do something else. I got another image with it. Yes, I'm
Okay.
gonna show you a picture of something like that. Now, the missense mutation is this. So it's marked in medical literature as KCNT1 space C.2771 C greater than T. So that means there's a substitution there. And then in parentheses, this is the way it's coded in medical literature. P.pro for proline, PRO 924. That's the position for leucine. All right, so that's the substitution. It's basically doesn't have leucine, or it's for some reason putting proline instead of leucine when everyone else out there, or the majority of people out there, it's constructing it in this way. And it's a one little position of the molecule. Jeffrey, could you pull up that PowerPoint presentation? I got some slides. I'm just going to show a few that I did from here. So look at an ion channel here for a second. So ion channels occur in the cell membrane, and so like water and oxygen just passes through the membrane wall, and hydrogen, I don't know about water actually, oxygen and some other things do. Most of them is by diffusion is the term, but many of the bigger molecules like potassium, which is not really big, but it's a little bigger than oxygen, it needs to have its own special channel. So when you're dehydrated, you got a big issue. And I forgot to grab that video. I was going to show this really cool lady I want to have on the program, but they didn't respond back. But she talked about this very well. Good. So there's this balance between sodium inside the cell and potassium outside. And when the neuron, particularly, we'll say neuron because I'm going to talk about that, is activated, they switch places. One goes out, one comes in. Okay, and so then you got sodium going on the outside, and then sodium on the inside, and vice versa. Now, this is what the potassium channel. I'm going to give some analogies of how genetics medicine, and then I'll answer your question, Greg, is how when you're focused on something so long, it starts to seem big in your mind. And so you think this little missense could actually cause enough disease to kill a human being. But I'm going to give you an example of how we must always, and doctors, I'm not a doctor, But as human beings, at least for ourselves, when we're studying our own genes and a doctor comes and tells us something about a gene, we really got to understand how small these substitutions are. They're very, very, very minor. Now, if you're deleting huge sections of chromosomes like Down syndrome, it's a different story. But these do have a purpose. And I want to go show you. I'm not saying it can't, but I'm going to show you why it is so astronomically challenging to actually do that. Here's this stuff is to scale. Let's talk about the average neuron. It's microscopic. Okay. Now some of our neurons extend like 3 foot long in our back, but most of them are microscopic. And so we're going to say average. We're going to say really microscopic. And I'm not going to give the exact numbers. I might have it here. But Jeffrey, so that gene I just spoke of, it helps the transcription of potassium channels in the cell wall. All right. Now you say, well, potassium is very important. Yeah, it could totally destroy it. Well, let's watch. All right. So go ahead. So the potassium channels.
Peanut butter.
You see then I don't have a pointer, but if you see, Jeffrey, can you take that that cursor and move it over to the right where those little bumps are on the axon of the neuron, just straight to the right. No, it didn't move. Okay, see those little bumps? They're clear. They're like look like little I don't know, donuts around. That's myelin. If you don't know, okay. So what's most interesting? It's like insulation around the neurons. What's most interesting, all the action happens not the ends of the neuron, but in between those nodes, in between the spaces. Though that myelin is there to create a space for the potassium not to get out of that, to leave all of the electrolytes around that area. And I'll show you really how deep that is. It's phenomenally deep. But that's what it's doing. And so the difference between having those nodes and not is the difference between the speed of a cheetah and a slug. So mollusks don't have myelin. So they're very slow, snail-like movements, okay? Once you have myelin, nerves like fish and rabbits, okay, then it makes the neuron fire so much faster. So this myelin is so important, and to show why. All right, but it happens along the axon. All right, now go ahead. I'm going to show you really when it gets into the statistics here. Go ahead. The size we're talking here. Remember, this is a microscopic neuron. Go ahead, Jeffrey. Next slide. If we make the potassium channel the size of a person, and the height of the channel is about 6 nanometers normal, okay? If the cell wall is. All right, if the cell wall is 6 nanometers, which is about average, then this is the size of that potassium channel. All right, now this is an abstraction of the channel. The channel looks like it's just a bunch of molecules connected together, but it helps to illustrate. Yeah, it's going to help to illustrate this. And so those along the in the membrane is called lipid bilayer. Okay, so this is what on the inside it's not homophobic, hydrophobic or hydrophilic. One of the ones on that side is water. It's
hydrophobic means water hating. Hydrophilic means water loving.
Yes. So they're different. All right, let's go before we get banned off YouTube for misspeaking. Not only is misinformation, it's misspeaking. All right, Jeffrey, next slide, please. So that's basically her. Now, the potassium molecule or atom right there would be the size of a softball, regulation softball. So you get the concept of how big we're talking?
Mm-hmm.
All right, next slide. Now, this is where it really gets interesting. There's many different types of potassium channels. So the KCNT1 potassium channel only affects one type. How many types do you think there are? How many? The bodies you were talking about redundancy, right, Greg?
Are we talking about different? What's the word? Isotopes, or are we talking about something the way that
the channel
the potassium combined with other potassium?
Neither. The channel, the whole, the molecule. Go back, Jeffrey.
And these channels are specifically used for duplication of
no
chromosomes.
Good question. No, Now, all right. So Greg was confused. So I didn't explain. All right. This channel just allows. It's just a gate.
Okay.
It allows potassium to come in and out.
You're saying
That's
how many
it.
kinds of channels are there?
Well, yeah. Greg, you looked it up.
No, I didn't. I have no
Okay.
idea.
But hold
Well,
on. All
feel
right, I'll tell
free
you.
to. Actually,
I will tell you. I will say. Yeah. Check. Double check. So the channel is just a molecule, and this is I think it's a calcium activated potassium channel. So which means is when the neuron fires, it's like this lightning storm going through, shooting all of these electrolytes from one side of the end of the neuron to the other at like near speed of light. All right, or a fraction of it, but anyway. And if one of these calcium molecules hits a little trigger beneath, like, see, I have the arrow. Imagine that's dangling, and a calcium molecule runs by and triggers it. Then it will then open or close, depending on trigger, and shoot the potassium out or suck it back in. It's just a gate that pulls potassium in or out. Does that make sense?
Sure.
It's like a trap door that pulls potassium and potassium only in. So there are other types of potassium channels which this gene doesn't affect. It only affects these. Now let's suppose we have many different types of people, and this helps get it into perspective of how many different channels. How you were talking about redundancy, Greg, how the body repeats things over and over to protect it, to better preserve it, right?
Yep.
Same thing with potassium channels. It's not going to leave it just to one channel that could be fried from one gene missense. It's
Right.
going to create many potassium channels. Go ahead, Jeffrey, flip this through. 3 types of potassium channels? No.
Three?
Is it more redundant than 10?
I don't know. Thousands.
More than
I don't know.
20? How redundant do you think the body is when it comes to potassium channels? 30?
I don't know. I don't
300
know.
plus.
I don't know. Can you give me an example of a couple of different kinds
Yes.
of channels so I know what
I'm going to
talking
give you one. All right. There are over 300 different types of potassium channels alone. Now there's calcium activated, so calcium makes it open. There's some where it may be open from hydrogen or whatever. So they open from different molecules. Many, many, many different types. 300 is a lot. And then if you think how many of those could be fit on a neuron and how many neurons are, there's probably, I think they said there's 100 trillion or 10 trillion, some number of neurons in the body, in the brain. Now, let's just kind of go to see, really, could this little potassium molecule going in and out of one channel a little slower, it wouldn't go out, it would actually go slightly farther, but like 10% higher than normal. That's all this mutation would do. Go ahead and show, we're going to show some scale. And you guys answer this to me. So I talked that the neuron, the axon is like a big electrical tornado. And it just sucks all of these electrolytes from one end to another because it wants to get that direction. One direction gets the sodium out, one direction gets the sodium in. One gets the potassium in, one gets the potassium out. Okay, so if we take that nanometer, that girl was, I don't know, let's say she's 5 or 6 feet tall, and she represents the average height of potassium channel, not including the trigger below her feet, then you would have an F5, that the axon diameter would be that of an F5 tornado, 2 miles wide. So now we think of that little potassium thing, that little potassium molecule, in respect to a tornado, an electrical tornado, 2 miles, the largest tornado possible. Do you think a softball is going to be affected in a negative, going to affect the tornado?
Not likely.
Let's go on. Next slide, Jeffrey. It gets more extreme. People lose sight of the magnitude we're talking. That little neuron would be then equivalent to the length of the United States. And the height of the myelin sheath, next slide, Jeffrey, be the length, the node of Ravier would be the length of 5.5 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. Throwing the softball 10% farther, when you're talking about a height of 5.5 Empire State Buildings, it's very unlikely that that could have any negative effect on the human body.
I got a good arm, but not that good.
And you got to understand this tornado isn't even enough to affect it. So this is the magnitude that people lose sight of when they're talking about these gene missense. So the missense mutation, this one has a +1 and a gain of function. So the gain of function means, well, too much potassium outside of the neuron could be bad, and so we're going to call it +1 gain of function, and therefore, but you understand the +1 is very small. Some of these have +30 gain of function. All right, so it's a or favorability, +1 favorability. So we don't want typically, or you would think, if we're eugenicists, how you call it, eugenicists. If we were eugenicists, we wouldn't want that gain of function to throw that softball 10% farther than normal. But would it do any damage? Especially when you have 300 other potassium channels all firing properly. Well, believe it or not, diagnoses are being made of this very thing. There are papers written saying this is a very destructive gene mutation. Yet every now and then I check the database, it's taken out. And then every now and then it goes right back in.
Huh.
Because what they're doing is that what happens is they test thousands of kids every day and they send it in. All right. This is really kind of hard to explain. Any doctor who's registered any of these molecular guys, whatever, what do they call them? Neurogenesis or whatever. So that focus on this particular gene. They can file, they do studies, they get a case, they say, okay, I got a patient, I'm going to have them tested for this and this gene disease, this genetic disease. And they send it to the database, telling them what the prognosis is. He or she has this. So we're checking for these 300 different gene mutations. Do you have any of those that match as a disease? And they send it back, yes, there's 3 that are potentially disease causing. And then they send the diagnosis back to the parents, say, your kid has this disease. It's not good. In reality, what happens is that database is changing constantly. And often people then test another person and that gene missense comes back as being, well, I got a perfectly healthy kid that has that missense. There's nothing wrong with him. And so the doctor says, no, this is a neutral missense. It doesn't cause any problem whatsoever. And so they change the database. They don't retell the parents, but the database is taken out or moved into uncertain category or harmless category. That's not the exact term, but it's something like that. So they move these things away, but the parents go on with the gene diagnosis, even though later it turns out to be nothing. And this happens every day, all day, all around the world.
And the study of genetics and even genetic doctors, whatever, for instance, Arizona has one. There's one doctor that does and it's like a 2-year wait to even get in there. And I want to make a clarification. Down syndrome is caused by a genetic duplication of gene number 21.
Yeah.
And like my daughter, she was born with bent pinkies, right?
Yeah.
They were just odd. Whatever.
I didn't know that, but
no history of that anywhere in both of our families. So
that would be called a de novo missense mutation. Yeah. Sorry, where it's not passed on from the parents. Go on.
Yeah. So I paid out of pocket like $2,500 to get a genetic test, and lo and behold, she had a partial duplication of Q4, meaning chromosome number 4. Slight, and then. So we finally saw the geneticist and everything else, but my ex was studying like, oh my goodness, look at this, they're non-functional. There's this, my daughter's completely fine. She just has bent pinkies, and there's no correlation between the bent pinkies and the 4Q duplication. And, but there's all kinds of minute duplications that don't really affect, but there's other people with this duplication that are non-functional. So you're kind of alludes to your point where you have this. It's just like, no. And it's an evolving practice, right?
Mhm.
And there's so few of them. I mean, Arizona's huge, right?
They all know each other. They all know each
genetic.
other around the country. Yeah. Hmm.
So, but she was good because she said, we can only say this, we can monitor it, might be more prone for this, that, and the other thing. Doesn't mean much anything. I mean, she even went and got a support group and found this guy in the UK that took the bus for the first time when he was 18. And you have to prepare yourself. And I'm like, okay. He also has severe
This
autism.
is why I want to do this video, because
Bunch
it's
of
this
other
kind of
stuff.
stuff I'm trying to stop. I know that I hate this because people are panicking over things that aren't even well defined.
That's exactly right. Once you get a genetic test, there are probabilities and factors that go beyond. And if they were being honest and frank with you, there are some blatants. Like if you have a duplication that's huge, it's going to be obvious. But the minute ones, you're worrying over nothing. In my opinion, I go to the whole God's plan thing. It's like, you don't know anything at her capabilities at all. And I knew straight away she wasn't talking by a little bit late, but I could tell her to do very complex stuff. And I'm like, this isn't her. Just stop. Mm-hmm. But like you said, there's a lot of worry unnecessarily.
That it's that stuff that I'm trying to stop. And I had it so bad where I went in and would talk something. It wasn't even with a geneticist, just some doctor, an ENT that started talking about genetics, and it started to sound like eugenics. And I reported him. I said, we can't see that guy anymore because he said this, and this, and that sounds a lot like eugenics. I just can't in good conscience have 100%. My kids see this doctor anymore.
And the whole your thing to the duplication of 46 with the blood test at 12 weeks. A, you don't know that that's going to be the point. B, a Down syndrome kid has a brilliant life, and they're the most benevolent people I've ever seen. But people are making decisions off that to terminate. This is widely known, like in for certain areas of Europe, that's one of the factors.
I think the biggest thing with that is people need to stop thinking that it's 100% accurate. It's not. I have personal testimony. I know. I mean, we were close. Vanetta was close friends with them. We would have dinner with them. Oh, do you ever remember the first time you ever had guacamole? That was over at their house. He doesn't remember when it was. He was pretty young. Yeah, but I remember, and we were friends. We'd hang out. We'd go to the bars, the guys, and so it's just not 100%. It's not what they say.
And I made the decision
my son's eyes are going to stay blue. They're absolutely convinced that these 100%. Things are true, but it's not true. It's flat out not true.
And I made the determination
we went to Florida
with my ex that if they come back with this, because she wanted the test, we're going through no matter what. Period. Full stop. And I'm like, if you don't want to do it, I will take care of the child forever. So. Good. But we both were aligned that, I mean, that's just, I mean, it's a different story if they, as you fully, there's all kinds of factors, but you're right. The genetic stuff, some of them are a high probability, but then again, they've proven time and time again that some of it's speculative, especially with the small duplications.
Yeah, they really need to be careful with the way they're populating the database. This is my concern because it's usually shared, especially the NIH. I'm gonna pull it up when I'm gonna have you guys talk for a second. I'm gonna pull it up the database because it's you can see the name of the doctors who put it in there. I'm often in there because I love to watch how it changes. They just put it in, and I guess I don't know a better way. If I were in the field, I would be fine saying this is the way it's going to be. Everything is going to be considered benign, likely benign, until proven otherwise. That means you need to have a large number of cases where it's always there, and they don't have all the medicine.
Exactly, like Ancestry.
I'm going to pull it up.
Ancestry.com always gives you updates. According to the latest science, you have these traits. These traits every 6 months because it's going to. I mean, you look at the complexity of it. Just to understand it and map it just with the DNA was a phenomenal task. Now the inner workings of that is another evolution of science that they're nowhere near.
I've spent a lot of time with Ancestry DNA. I use it to find my cousins and stuff like that.
Yeah.
A lot of time. Anyway, I just want to totally change the subject quickly, Jeff, and just say that I wasn't expecting you to give a presentation, but I love the way you do
just
it.
of those slides.
Nice
Just of those slides.
I know, but it's nice and simple and not too much in any given slide. I sure would have wished that all the speakers at the conference had presentations that were like that. Honestly,
Yeah.
I want to go back to like 15 minutes ago, if you don't mind. You
I
talked
don't
about
mind. Nobody agrees with me, so you might as well.
you talked about 300 different kinds of potassium channels,
Yeah.
and I asked you to give me an example of 2, so I knew what you meant. Was it like
I gave
different
2.
in what way? Different in the length,
Okay,
the
so
size of them, different.
He
in how
said
many potassium
banana.
per
I
minute
did
and so
say,
forth?
all
I'm
right, so
kidding.
here's the way that the difference of 2. All right, so one would be the gene that constructs this particular potassium channel, which has a little trigger underneath it that is activated by calcium. There's a chemical reaction when it sticks together with calcium, the gate opens.
Okay.
There's other
So
ones.
they're different in their triggering mechanisms and
Yes,
sizes and stuff
yes,
like.
and,
Okay, that's all I
and
wanted
the
to know.
shape of them. There's a lot of differences.
Fair.
So
Okay.
the body
I just
needs
wanted to get it. It was
Yeah.
nebulous until you give me an example.
That's fine. That's
The
fine.
second thing, and this
Mhm.
was about a half an hour ago, that I haven't forgotten. You were
Okay.
talking about, maybe even longer. You were talking about genetic, genes changing throughout your life, and you
Yes.
said that your diet could change your genes. I'm
Yes.
not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just
Okay.
that's what you said. Am I right?
I'm right. All right.
Okay.
I'm not
That's what I
right,
said.
but
All right.
you're
So
right.
now, here's my question. As you know, my brother was in a motorcycle accident at
Mhm.
age 20. He's now 67. And he's a different person than he was before the accident. There's no question about it. He's brain damaged. He's got, physical damage and all those kinds of things. Do you think, according to what you said, were his genes changed as a consequence of his accident, or is it something totally not genetic? What do you think?
Of course, there's going to need to be adaptations to survive that much
Right.
damage, but I wouldn't know that any of them would have helped. So, but just think of it this way: there's been people in accidents that have been, for over many years, and they survive. Some get attacked by a lion, and then they shake off the lion off their leg, and then they go have babies later. The body learns, the DNA learns about those events, and what it can fix, it will fix for the next generations. So I'm a big fan of anyone with genetic mutations or any problems to have kids, because this is how we got to where we are today. Now,
you say they should or should not?
Should. Down syndrome people should be having kids, and lots
I
of
agree.
them, because I think that it's very important. I think it's very important because the body is trying to solve some problem. We don't know what it is. At least that's my belief.
Uh-huh.
Down syndrome is trying to solve some problem. It stops some urgent environmental factor that would have killed the kid otherwise. And if we don't let evolution or the process of the body learn, it's already learned about Down syndrome. Hey, this stops whatever that was. But if we stop it and these kids are aborted and no longer that mutation serves humanity, then whatever disease was affecting them is going to.
What you're saying sounds
It's
very
a
similar
duplication of a
to
chromosome. So, I mean,
what's that? I didn't hear you.
it's a
get both sides.
duplication of a chromosome, not necessarily a mutation. That's what causes Down
It's a mutation. Duplication is a type of mutation.
What I was going to say is what you were
mutation.
just saying sounds very similar to me to just the whole idea of disease. If you have a cold, as long as you don't die, the best thing to do is just to let it play out, and maybe take a couple of aspirin for pain relief at best. But beyond that, it's best to have the fever. Your body is trying to solve a problem, and having a fever is its way of solving that problem.
Yes, yes. And if you get rid of
not
that,
necessarily
then it's
genetics
not
going on, but
genetics is the same thing. All right, John, to answer your question, a duplication mutation is a type of genetic mutation in which a segment of DNA is copied and inserted into the genome, resulting in multiple copies of that segment. This duplication can occur in various forms, affecting a single gene, part of a gene, an entire gene, or even larger segments of the chromosome, which is the case in Down syndrome. It's a larger segment of the chromosome.
Jeff, when you told me we were going to be talking about genetics, I thought we were going to go to a totally different place, and that is this. And don't want to open up a can of worms, but I know we're late. But here's what I thought we were going to be talking about.
Yeah,
and that is deliberate alteration of genetics. we know that in history, you go to all these Egyptian things, and they got these half bird, half half eagle, whatever, or half lion and half this,
Mhm.
and Greek mythology, same thing. We know that in ancient times they were doing that. I believe because they were genuinely manipulating genes, and somehow we lost that technology. But I also believe that that's going on right now, and I believe that that is the bad sort of genetics. I don't know if I'd call
Well,
it
if you
eugenics,
look,
but
they've been physically doing that with dogs throughout time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And this is a controversial subject, but the horrible slave trade would put the bigger slaves together to have a bigger product. So they've been doing it human
yeah,
wise, as well as dogs would be the perfect example. They have
right.
breeds, and they do it with plants through
But that isn't genetic
Yeah. That's
manipulation that I mean,
apples. They're all
like
from cloned trees.
interspecies,
well,
or
All right,
it's
let's
not
not
at that
talk over each
level.
other if we can. Go ahead.
It's not that.
Finish your
It's
thought,
not
John.
that level. I mean, uh, but it's a natural, physical way of doing it.
right.
Now,
And I'm fine with that.
I don't know if I'm more interested to see what are they currently trying to do genetically at the molecule
Oh, they're
level.
trying to mix birds with humans and weird stuff.
Yeah,
There's a lot of.
like
I mean, I
humans
don't know that
with
for a fact, but
pigs.
I've been seeing some pictures of people talking about it. So these things, maybe it's just people's imaginations, but
These chimeras. That's the
yeah,
word for it.
yeah,
It's
it's
scary.
just a matter of
That's scary
time.
stuff. That stuff I'm again it.
Yeah. So all right. So my general thought is that if we can understand as lay people how genetics work, then we can't later be manipulated by something that goes over our head.
Fair.
And so the first thing that I get concerned about when anyone's talking about genes is the moment they say genetic disease, I pull back. I say, no, there's no such thing. I'm shutting down on that. There's no such thing unless you can prove it to me, because I've seen too much evidence to the contrary. If well, they say, well, it's a medical fact. No, it's a medical fact that the body made a mutation, but it's not a medical fact of why. To think it did it because something destroyed that mechanism of creating genes, I don't believe it. If you say, yeah, the body got infiltrated of mercury and it had to make some adjustments because of that, I believe that. Okay, so there's a new virus that can spread and the body's got to learn to fight, so it's making genetic mutations to try to fight it, to do new things. I believe that, but I wouldn't call it, it's like it's mixing the symptom with the cause, like the whole fever example you used. So it's not the cause of the problem. So the genetics mutation is not the cause of the problem. It is the last ditch effort to solve a more immediate pressing problem.
Interesting.
So malaria is going to
like that
wipe that colony out within a matter of months, or we make some changes and we extend that to be, well, they can live to their 30s or 40s. Their life's going to be rough, but at least the colony is not wiped out. Maybe they can procreate. As you've seen, nature is really cruel. It really cares only about about people and animals until the point where they breed, and then it doesn't really care. I mean, spiders die and stuff right after breeding, and fish die. It's as long as you can procreate, you're good. So if it can solve the problem of malaria and get to the point where they're breeding, then they can pass that new genetic code on to the next generation. And then sickle cell is not a problem, and then neither is the malaria problem. This is the way I think all mutations come from.
What you just said, Jeff, I agree with wholeheartedly. I think that's a biblical perspective that, I mean, the Bible says we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And
Yes,
so
I
we
believe that.
know that we have, our bodies have an incredible ability to heal themselves, to heal itself. So I'm on board with all of that. And
It
I don't
doesn't
know
make
to what
mistakes.
extent
It doesn't
something
make
is
mistakes.
genetic or
I don't believe it.
otherwise.
Yeah, I don't believe it makes mistakes. It gets external crap, whether that's extra DNA put in there. It gets something that doesn't belong, and it makes its best effort to work with it.
It tries to figure out a way around it.
There's one more
agree
cool
with
thing that I think you guys both are going to like, and I was surprised. I was surprised, Greg, that you didn't hear about this one before, because it's all about the okay, Jeffrey? All right. It's all about the creationists are using this as an argument. I don't like it when creationists use science as an argument for God, because when it comes out to be wrong, It's just embarrassing. I believe in God, and I believe in science. They don't. So, but this one is really interesting, and it has to do with what we're
I
talking
might
about.
differ with you on that, but go ahead.
I get really nervous when people use science as an argument for God. That's all I'm saying.
I see.
All right, that's all I'm saying.
But you can certainly do science that supports scripture, and I believe that
Absolutely,
ultimately truth
absolutely.
does, because that's the truth. But go ahead.
But I don't believe that you're ever going to prove God can exist from some fact, because he doesn't
Fair enough.
seem to want to be proven to exist. It
Fair
just
enough.
doesn't seem that is his interest. He's more interested in a faith-based relationship of trust and so on and
It's
so
not
forth.
so much
It seems that way
proving
to
as
me.
it is, just supporting. It's this
Yes,
fact supports scripture.
that I
And that's as
definitely,
far as
yes.
we'll ever get.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence, but I don't believe that evidence is the same thing as proof. Legalistic proof, yes. Mathematical proof, no. Scientific proof,
I'm
no.
with you.
But legalistic proof, I think there's enough evidence for God. Jeffrey, could you find that article on the ATP synthase? And this is going to give you a picture of what one of these channels, something like what a potassium channel looks like. Right there it is. So it sits in the membrane of a cell. Can you do a full screen, Jeffrey? And then click on that picture, the ATP synthase, just to the right of that. Can you enlarge just that picture? This is the most amazing thing of all life right here. So it sits in that, remember the membrane where the potassium channel sits, and it's got a little thing hanging down beneath it, right? Does that make sense when you look at the image, Greg, John?
Mhm.
Yeah,
You see
I'm
those
not sure
lines?
what scale we're looking at, but
All right, remember, it's about 6 nanometers. Remember the potassium channel I showed you?
yeah,
And the cell wall?
yeah.
Should I go back to the PowerPoint?
So is this what the cell wall is made of, or what
The
are we?
cell wall are those lines at the top of the image. You see those lines?
Okay.
That's the inner membrane of the mitochondria. All right. Now this is just one type. Now you see that what's being held in the top. Do you see that structure? It looks like a column.
Yeah,
It's
the
the
blue
front view.
column.
Yeah.
Thank you. Blue and purple alternating bands.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, that is almost identical structure to a potassium channel. A lot of the channels look like this, and they often have something hanging beneath it. Well, this right here is a free energy machine, and every single cell in every single life form has them.
Interesting.
And they're way more complex than the cell itself, which is completely refutes Darwin, where he didn't. Now it doesn't mean that God exists. That's why I try to stay clear.
I'm with you. It supports the idea.
It actually ends evolution. If Darwin said, if ever there is a process that starts where a simpler process followed a more complex, then his theory is bunk. That's what he said. This is exactly the case. Now, let's look to see what it does. This molecule it accepts oxygen and some things into it from outside the cell, and it makes ATP, which is the source of energy of all life. All right, go ahead and let's look at the abstract view. It's easier to see. But this is something with all these channels. Look, scroll on down.
So the ATP, just
Right
to
there.
be
Click
clear,
on
those
that.
are the letters that you use to make DNA, right?
No, ATP is the energy source of the body.
Okay. I'm not a biologist, so
okay, that's okay. Let's go up to ATP, Jeffrey. Let's make it clear what ATP is. So bodybuilders are very aware of what ATP is.
I've heard of ATP.
All right, so I'm not going to say the word. It's adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so it is just click on that first one, Jeffrey. You see the first sentence. Just click there. Let's just get the definition, just so we are all on the same page. So, some people know some of this, some will not. And that's okay. I don't see anything. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. My screen, I can't read it. So it's a nucleotide, provides energy, drive, and support many processes in living cells. Muscle contraction, nerve impulse, chemical synthesis, found in all known forms of life. It is referred to as the molecular unit of currency for intracellular energy transfer. Okay, now let's go back to how it's made.
So is ATP found in the blood? Is it found in the muscles? Is it found in the bones? Where do you find it?
It's all over, but I don't think it passes the blood-brain barrier, but I'm not sure offhand on that how big it is. Yeah, I think it's a kind of larger molecule, but I don't know because I heard that from somebody else, and I said it sounds strange. It's so these synthases are very small. So you think of how big a cell is. The cell has probably 100 or so, depending on the size of the cell, 100 of these. And so it basically it takes in oxygen. You need oxygen. So it's kind of like exercise. They say exercise will give you more energy out than you ever put in, because all you need to do is supply these synthase oxygen, and it just starts producing these molecules and synthesizing this energy molecule. And so it's in the nucleus. It's all over the body. I don't think it's in the blood. So, but you can read up on it later. I'm mostly interested in this. I think you're mostly interested in this because it's where creationists are kind of studying this. Go ahead and scroll down to the abstract image of that. And I went into right there, that first one right there. Just click on that thing. Up, down, 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 right there. Yeah. Okay. It's a motor. It literally is a motor. And look away those angles. So those so ATP comes off the top. I went into I built a lot of models, but I couldn't find it on my files and didn't have time of this, and trying to figure out if there's a way you can make this on a large scale, just to see it operate. You know what I mean? And absolutely you can. I just don't have the money to buy all the parts. But yes, you can do this. I mean, you couldn't do the creation of the molecule at this level, but you could see how it rotates and spins on a large scale. I think that would be super cool. But people are saying, how did mitochondria build this if mitochondria needs it to exist? So mitochondria is like bacteria that needs a home. That's all it is. Yet every single bacteria requires this in its membranes. How did it occur? It's way more complex than the mitochondria itself. Well, I don't know about the DNA, but so that's what the people are stuck with is, how did it happen? My thought, which is why I said people shouldn't be saying this is just God. My thought is that given a certain environment with bubbles and the membrane of bubbles and water droplets, this little vortex could, if those molecules were present, would naturally form this shape. I think it's probably something that would naturally occur.
Jeff, what you're talking about is just another example of many of what are called the irreducible complexity arguments.
Yes. This is the big one now they're using.
The various parts are just require the existence of all the other parts, and they have to come together in a certain way. And how could they do that just on their own? They can't. Right.
So that's why they're using this as an argument. But my thought is, you could theorize that if there's a water droplet with those molecules in it, if they are swirled, and then all of a sudden those molecules come in there, they would have that attraction like they do to form that structure. It could be theorized. That's why I say people shouldn't be always in my opinion, trying to prove God, but it's definitely an example, evidence. You had the term. I don't know enough about this form of evolution. What was the term?
Irreducible complexity.
There it is. Reducible complexity. Yeah.
Irreducible complexity. I mean, these things were not known by Darwin and the people that followed him, and we keep finding more of these. Systems that just require all this mechanism that depends on itself. And the more we study it, the more we keep finding things like this.
Yeah. All right, you can go ahead and close that out. But that is for example, here's the thing. There are no missense mutations with that structure. Because there's nothing that can stop it. There's nothing that can stop it. There's no better way to perfect it, and there's no way it can go wrong. So there's no missense mutation of it. And so it kind of makes me think, then how would there be of other areas? It's a very complex molecule. You saw it had all of the danglings and all of that stuff with the just like a potassium channel. It has stuff hanging below.
The real thing is way more complicated than the picture you.
No matter. The one is an actual. It was the molecular structure. Could you go back to it one time? The first one I showed you, Jeffrey. Those actually show the atoms that are in it. Just go back to the Wikipedia.
Is it ATP?
Yeah. Or yeah, go to that one, but it's not the image. It's the other image, but the same there. Go up,
Top one.
right there. Yeah, so you can zoom in on that, and those are actually that's the molecular structure. I mean, if atoms are round, but that's it. So you remember I showed that picture of the woman holding
So are the
softball?
different colors represent different kinds of atoms?
Yeah, different proteins. Yeah, go
Different
ahead and
proteins.
scroll down.
But is this
Go to
one atom, or is this, I mean, one molecule?
yeah, right there. Zoom in that second image right there, right there. So that starts to get a look of the proteins. I can't read that. Maybe Greg, you can read that, and you can then see the colorings.
I gotta lean way forward to read that.
Yeah.
It's small print.
Can you make
I
that
need
large
reading
screen, Jeffrey?
glasses. It says the FO and F1 axle and the stator regions are color coded magenta, green, orange, cyan, respectively. I can't even read the first part because your name covers it up.
Yeah, I don't know. Jeffrey's not seeing the same thing as us. So he can't fix
Okay.
it. All right,
Anyway,
that's okay.
so
All right, go ahead. But
colors
you can
represent,
study this. Yeah, you can
different-
study this
different vaccines.
deeply. So we only got about 10 minutes, and I wanted to just kind of like I wanted to summarize, get your opinions on this. I mean, I definitely I'm of the opinion that one day we're going to find out that there's no such thing as bad genes, and that all of that was equivalent to eugenics. The concept of saying I have a genetic disease is equivalent to saying I have something less because I have white skin or black skin. I believe that it's going to come down to that. Now, there are truths that certain attributes have more beneficial, but it depends on the activity. For example, they're now. I remember this, and I was really upset about when I was coaching soccer with the parents saying, "I'm going to have my kid tested for the athlete gene." And I go, "Oh, brother." You could tell who's going to be the better athlete for sprinting and running by who has the thicker Achilles tendon. Okay. And there's a gene that makes some of these Achilles tendons larger in some people and some groups of people and some families. But the thing is you can go and lift weights and build it up. Even though it's
it doesn't mean they have the grit to actually do it.
Yeah, you got it. And also the average person has born with a small ligaments. He can buff them up. If you eat healthy, I mean, especially the developmental years of kids, if they're running, their ligaments are going to get thicker and stronger, and they will gain the athleticism that they need. So I just can't do it. Yes, there are some people that are inherently better at certain activities, but it doesn't mean that the genes that they have are bad. There is no I mean, we all should be healthy. But not everyone needs to be a sprinter, right? So not everyone needs to win the 100-yard dash in the Olympics. But to say I don't have thick ligaments, mine are normal. But ligaments in my ankle and my Achilles tendon is average, doesn't mean I can't go. In fact, I was a very good sprinter in one league in high school. So it doesn't mean anything. You can develop these structures over time with diet, exercise, challenges.
Well, yeah, your body's going to adapt to your activities. Like yes. I think the human skeleton sheds itself every 7 years. So if you're stagnant or like this for 7 years, that's going to be a long time. But if you're lifting weights and you're making yourself upright, your body will adapt to your activity.
Yes. You're absolutely right. There's a term for this. It's called, and it's in mathematics. In fact, we should have a video on this too, because the issue came up with some emails. You kind of know with the troller I was talking with Greg about. But function creates the form. So if your function is lifting weights regularly, then the form of you is going to be that of a bodybuilder. If your function is to sit at a computer hunched over all day long, then your form is going to be a hunchback, which is kind of me lately. So
carpal tunnel.
Yeah. So in mathematics, it's the same thing too. So a function creates the form. How the function behaves is going to create what the form of it results in. And so in mathematics, even people are forgetting that form is a product of the function. But in health, it's absolutely necessary to understand that. And so you have a lot of people who are getting these autoimmune diseases and things like that. And it's like, well, what was the function you were doing that caused this form? And probably had a lot to do with chemicals and things like that. I'm also of the opinion that the body, even though my doctor, Ohio, really like a lot, She's like, it's a medical fact. I'm like, no, no. I said, she's like,
I know how to trigger you now.
your autoimmune, your body can attack itself. And I said, I don't believe that. She's like, it's a medical fact. And I said, no, it's a medical effect. It's attacking something in your tissue.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that it's attacking perfectly good tissue. It could be contaminants. It could be a bacteria. It's attacking something.
Yeah.
And it could be something like a preservative from a food. It could be who knows what it is that we put in our body. So
And they have a lot of immune blockers now with medical injections.
Yeah, so that just allows all those toxins to come in freely because there's nothing stopping them from coming.
Oh, and I've been on those, and I had to wean myself off because of my psoriasis. It did stop it in its tracks.
Yeah.
But the contraindication was 104-degree temperature off of and strep throat all the time. So there's a yin and yang, but
yeah.
And they say you got to be on it forever. And I can tell you anecdotally, they used to have me do this medication inject twice, one in each leg once a month. I haven't been on it for a month. I have no flare-ups. As soon as I get a flare-up, I do one injection. Haven't had a problem. Now I'm not getting the colds, but that has to do with cash and like frequency. It's a $2,000 medication. So the FDA has proven themselves corrupt. So they'll over medicate just for those dollars, in my opinion, because it's brilliant medication, but they tend to say they want to make sure anything you're on for life.
Yeah. Of course they want that.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I have a closing thought, Jeff. I assume we're close to the end, and it's just sort of just to maybe put some perspective on it. As you know, we were in total agreement. I believe we're fearfully and wonderfully made and all of that. We had a speaker at the conference. His name was Greg Braden. He's a New York Times bestselling author, I think 5 times. One of his books was called Beyond 0 Point. So I laughed and said that we talk about 0 point energy a lot. And so anyway, he had actually been at Tesla conferences in the 80s. So anyway, neat guy. Wow. And he talked about our divinity. Now I have a little bit of problem with that. I would call it our humanity. What makes us special? We have imagination. We have, this ability, and he was saying all of our DNA are like antennas. We have this ability to be able to tap into not just what's within us, but all the stuff outside of us. And we have creativity and all of these things, which are beyond just the physical. And so anyway, I guess my point is that we are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made, and DNA is a huge part of it.
Yes.
So I'm really pleased that you're digging into this stuff. And I think it's encouraging. I just like to agree with you that we need the perspective that we have something very special in our humanness. And that's what he was bringing about, that we don't want to get tapped into this matrix of, giving up our humanity in order to become part of the, part computer, part robot. We lose a lot when we do that. And our DNA is good evidence of that. There's no computer's ever going to compete with it. So that's my
I got to respond. We should do this. I definitely want to do it because I want to do a whole talk on Neuralink. I want to do a whole talk on Neuralink one of these days. And it's going to be this, and then John can finish. I think everyone should be very concerned anytime you are putting something artificial into your body. So Neuralink would be, putting antennas or, electrodes into the brain. Very possible, very great things come from it. But I have the same concerns about putting metal plates in your body. Anything you put in your body, you're prone to a very long surgery, which could lead to infection. It's a major issue. So if you really absolutely have to, and I can see it be good, but
you could be altering your genes and making yourself something other than what humanity is intended.
You will adapt and change to anything put in your body. The first thing your body is going to do is, what is this? Do we need to attack it, or can we live side by side? That's going to be the first thing. Anything it's going to. If it's just some metal and some steel, it's not going to do anything to it.
But yeah, I agree with you. But there's a lot of stuff you're putting in your body you have no idea at the chemical level with your food consumption that is absolutely worse than a physical thing put in you, in my opinion, because
we've all ingested poison to some degree, because you can't be perfectly pure about what you put in your body.
My response, though, is that our body is from start to finish, skin to our bladder, is a large filtration system, and we don't bypass any of those filters when we eat. It goes through all of them. It hits every single one. Check this. Okay, toxin, send it to the liver. Do this, here, this, and that, and that. When you open up the skin, you're bypassing all of those filters. The skin is the first one. That's my only concern. Is like.
You are what you eat.
Bacteria, fungus is everywhere in the world. And the moment you expose, I'm not saying there's a problem with it. Sometimes you got to do. I've had surgery a couple times. I'll do it again if I have to. But it's always should be something that is not like there's some people giving birth. Like, I'm doing C-section every time. Just cut me open, and maybe they have to, but surgery is a serious thing, especially anywhere in the abdominal area. I mean, we mastered brain surgery. The Egyptians, thousands of years ago. Stomach surgery is only like 100 years old, and we got to be very careful with that.
Second brain,
very difficult. Yeah,
the intestines.
People used to die from the appendix, and I'm glad that they now have that. I had my appendix taken out. It was a huge blessing.
Oh, there's all kinds of examples, like that gastric bypass surgery.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff that
shrinks the stomach. What does that do? You metabolize at a rate 10 times faster than anything else. So alcohol consumption, there's a huge correlation between that surgery and people becoming absolute alcoholics.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it happened to my ex's mom because it metabolizes in seconds. One thing of wine is like having 5 or 6. So
there's consequences to all these things. Well, that's the only thing. I just want
to answer all the questions. I don't
know, especially with genes. It's the most complex computer code ever on the in the universe that we don't even understand it. And so my thing is disease. Don't call it disease. They don't have proof of it. You can call it a sickle cell a disease. But to the body and the immune system, it was a solution. You were going to die from malaria, or you're going to die 20 years later or 30 years later from sickle cell.
But the Roundup,
it's the
Roundup thing, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, is directly caused by the chemicals in Roundup. Period. Point blank. Been proven.
It's probably like 70-80% of all diseases are environmental. That's just
one that it was so obvious they had to act.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we got to be careful with putting our body. Yeah. Final thoughts, anyone?
Well, I just gave you mine.
I know.
That's it.
All right. Thank you, guys. Yeah, let's do one. What was it? Neuralink. I'm going to brush up. I've been kind of following a little bit. I'm very interested in it. Maybe we'll do one on Neuralink, but I'm not sure about next week. We're probably get Deacon up that podcast stuff. But
this was fun, Jeff.
Really quick.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. One last thing. We're going to have to switch back to Zoom. Jeffrey's back in school. So thank you, Jeffrey. Until next summer, we will not be
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Enjoying your company, especially except maybe on Labor Days and things like that, or not Labor Days or holidays, but like school days. Sometimes they have Mondays off. We might do something like that. But
will you be able to do the live and Zoom?
No,
yourself?
I can't. It's gonna be too tricky. I'm gonna see if I can figure something out. Maybe I can control it from here.
They gotta make it easy.
See what I can do. Yeah, I can do it.
And people won't.
Let me think about
doing this.
You're amazing, Jeff.
No.
You are.
All right. Well, you're amazing, man. No. All right. Good. Thank you, guys. Talk to you soon. I'll let you know sometimes this week what we're doing. I think though Monday, if we can live stream, then we don't need to do a week ahead of time. We'll just go. But I'll let you know.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
I like the live.
God bless.
I
Thanks
do too. I like
everybody
live
for
stream
watching.
better too. All right.
All right.
Have a good one.
Bye now.